Evert,
Yeah.
I hear you have some new body tech.
Oh, yeah. I've been drinking Pedialyte all day, every day.
Exclusively?
In addition to water. I don't know what the right
Who needs
blend
water?
is. I recommend drinking water, but I don't know. People only drink Pedialyte when they feel crappy, but I've been drinking Pedialyte when I feel normal, and it's been putting me on another level. I feel stronger. I feel more powerful. I'm seeing clearer than I have in a long time.
I can't believe I just walked back into the room in the middle of this. How can I ask how you got? Did you just try it and then go like, "Hey, this works"? Or
Well, so I had only ever drunken it when I was hungover, and me and my partner went out to Korean barbecue and karaoke, and she was kind of hungover the next day. And I went and picked her up some, and I just was sipping it, and I just started feeling stronger. You know, it was like Tobey Maguire and Spider-Man 1, just feeling more powerful.
I mean, it's just Gatorade, isn't it? Or is that a dirty thing to say?
I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I don't know. I can't tell you why I feel so good. I can just tell you that I do. You know, I can do a similar test with Gatorade and report back, but I feel like maybe there's less sugar.
I need a blind taste.
Yeah.
Okay, the final question about this. It has a flavor, right? What flavor is it? Did you buy a flavored one?
Thick.
Extra thick.
I've been going through them, so I like the green one the most.
Okay.
But I ordered some blue ones. And I'm drinking the blue one right now, and I'm not sure how I feel about the flavor compared to the green.
I think we can get a sponsorship for both of our
That would be
streams and
awesome.
content platforms.
Because
Pedialyte.
the thing
Get at us.
they've only their whole audience is sick people.
Right.
Pedialyte, but they're really missing a huge portion of the unailed population. You know, there's a lot of people that aren't sick that could be drinking Pedialyte.
There's a lot of people that are totally fine that just need a little boost in their day, and that's it.
Yeah, I've been talking about this on stream too, and apparently they don't have it over in Europe, but it's basically Gatorade that tastes worse and is I think it's just because it has less sugar
And a little watered down.
Yeah, a little watered down. I'm thinking about putting water in the Pedialyte ahead of time. That way I don't have to I can just do it all at once.
Well, if we get you that sponsorship,
Yeah,
it won't cost anything anymore. You just replace all the water in your house with
that's
Pedialyte.
true.
Yeah. Who needs factor meals when you've got Pedialyte meal replacement plan? Hello and welcome to episode 245 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual and aspiring spike. My name is Shane, here in Denver, Colorado. With me on the line from Texas, it's the one and only Evart Moughon, a.k.a. Aspiring Spike. Welcome back, my friend.
Yeah, good to be back. I'm excited.
I like, what's funny now, Evart, is we're to the point where I just assume you're always busy doing something cool. Whether it's, brewing decks, streaming things, making some kind of video content or something like that. I'm like, I'm not going to bug Spike. But this week you were like, Shane, I want to come on. And I was like, heck yeah, let's do this, bud.
Yeah, I kind of figured that was the case, so I wanted to put myself out there.
What a day for you for us to reconnect too, because wow.
Yeah.
Twitter was on fire. Our Discord was on fire today. It's October 16th. Everybody knows a day that will live in infamy, maybe. And also this is the Godfather. Yeah, no comment for me.
It was a weird one for sure. I haven't really been on Magic Twitter at all today, but I was.
You're better off.
Well, I was in my chat. My chat was definitely going crazy today.
Yeah. It's the Godfather Dave Harburger from Chicago, Illinois.
It's
Hello,
me.
Dave.
I just tried to self-introduce myself so we can get onto the discussion. But first,
like Jay-Z.
First, allow me to introduce myself. That's a different song too. I'd love to let's just get into it. But first, I want to talk to you both about Heavy Play.
Please do.
Heavy Play, a new card game accessory brand that'll improve your game play and your game day. We love Randy and everything that he's doing over at Heavy Play. Their playmats, deck boxes, and card sleeves feature enhanced ergonomics, mobility, and protection, as you all know.
Dave.
Yeah.
I'm got to interrupt. So I really had my first full RCQ level tournament with the Heavy Play stuff, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I had that thing where we got repaired. Okay, so first round, sat down, got everything out, right? Had everything set up. They're like, we have a repairing. And everyone's like, groan. And like, I just slap my stuff to my mat and just calmly walk to my next place. I'm not like trying to throw everything in my bag. I'm just good to go.
Yeah. Was that thanks to Heavy Play's unique EquipMag system that allowed you to magnetically attach your dice, bundle decks, and carry your playmat with one hand? You know, I call that ABC. I call it ABC. It's attach, bundle, and carry. Like that's what Heavy Play does.
Wow.
Always be attached, bundling, and carrying.
That's actually, did you come up with that on like the cuff right here?
Just now, because I noticed
that was actually great. ABC, attach, bundle, carry.
You know, Evart, I do work in advertising.
That's awesome. Yeah, my partner also works in advertising.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she does.
Oh, God, we should get together and share horror
some
stories
synergy.
sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
So carry all your gaming gear in a single hand. It's coming soon to an LGS or shop near you, but you can also go to heavyplay.com and use code TheDiveDown2023 for 10% off your first order. That's Heavy Play. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks to Heavy Play for supporting The Dive Down. Shane, what's on this show?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot. I feel like we have these series of sort of grab bag episodes, but Modern is basically a series of grab bags these days in terms of what the discourse is, in terms of what the cool deck is, in terms of what we're doing. We've got Evart back on, first time in a few months. We want to talk some beans and lack of bans.
Yeah, bans and beans. That's what this episode is mostly about.
And, you know, like we basically were planning on having something to talk about in relation to what got banned or maybe restricted. Maybe we're going to have our first restriction in Modern. We're not going to have that. But, you know, we'll talk about perhaps what the thought process on this was. I think we haven't had Evart on to talk about, you know, what you think the state of Modern is. I'm sure you've talked about this ad nauseum on your stream, but not everyone who listens here watches your stream. So, and we haven't talked to you about it. So we'll get in the weeds a little bit on there. I played an RCQ this past weekend. I will not bore you all with a tournament report, you know, round by round type thing. But I think what I really have is sort of a follow up to our discussion last week that was all about scam's place in the meta, our kind of general takes on scam, because I have some more. The bean stuff, I think we have some Cascade beans that I know you've been playing with, Evart. Dave, you played with it this week, right?
I did.
Sweet. I did not. I was too busy preparing and playing an RCQ, so I'm interested to hear what this is all about. I have an idea. I have a sneaking suspicion, but we'll all find out together. And then, of course, Nerd Rage Gaming, we are the official podcast of the NRG series. They had an Indianapolis Pioneer 10K Showdown this past weekend. We'll talk about that event, just see what's going on in Pioneer again, and give you a little update about what the meta was looking like up there in the Motor City of Indy.
People love when you do that. But first, we're going to do some housekeeping.
Yeah, it's a classic bit.
Super fun. Yeah, that's for the real dive heads that have been with us for 200 episodes. Housekeeping, new patrons, Chuck M. Thank you so much for joining us on our Patreon. We appreciate you. We have one new review from Cardboard Hoarder, who just said, "Great show, 5 stars. Just want to see if they actually read these." Guess what? We do. I'm not sure why it took 2 weeks for us to get this review, but here it is.
There's a delay on like the review aggregator, so apologize, Cardboard B Hoarder.
And then finally, we've been talking about Spotify a lot lately. Spotify is popping off with the engagement lately. We had 11 comments on the last episode from Florian, Dylan J, Lucas K, Sunny S, Man W, Alex N, Kimchi, Dark Depths, Kevin S, Peter C, and Dr. Cool Guy from Homestar Runner, apparently. And thanks to everybody who took the poll. We'll talk about this in a minute. We had 162 votes on that poll, which is pretty great.
Wowee.
Yeah. If you would like to support us, please check out patreon.com/thedivedown. You can check out our store at thedivedown.com/store. You can go to Mana Traders. Mana Traders, the longest sponsor and partner of the Dive Down. ManaTraders.com. Rent Magic Online cards. Use the code TheDiveDown23 to get 10% off your first 2 months of rentals. Still awesome. Mana Traders. Barrister and Man. Will is still supporting us as well. You can use code TheDiveDown23 on great shaving and skincare products for 15% off. And finally, our friends at NRG, just cross-pollinating some synergy with the team at NRG, but you can get 8% off if you use code DIVE8 at Nerd Rage Gaming right now. Okay, bans.
Yeah.
This happens quite frequently these days, where we know that there's a ban window, or we were thinking that there was a ban window, and it is October 16th, and what happened?
The announcement was so sparse and so weird that I honestly thought it was one of those fake pages. Like I thought that it was a fake. And then I was like, well, that's the URL. Maybe they published it without, updating the content in their CMS, but literally no changes to all formats. Yeah. But by the way, we have a new product for you to purchase in the form of the changed boosters.
We'll talk about that in a little bit later. I think that was equally weird. Yes, so we all know no changes to Modern, no changes to Pioneer. Those are the formats we care about. Here's the results of the poll that we put up about what people who listen to the show think should have been banned for what it's worth. 162 votes, 53 votes for Grief. That's 32% of people who voted in this poll said that Grief should be banned. 16% or 26 votes went to Fury. 9.9%, 16 votes went to Orcish Bowmasters. 27 people or 16.7% voted for the One Ring. And Nothing got 24.7%. So realistically, Grief and Nothing were kind of the leaders in all of this, with the rest kind of following it. And guess what? We got Nothing. We deserve Nothing, and that's what we received. But what did we all think? Evert, we just did a whole episode on Scam last week, so love to hear what you think.
Yeah, so I'm coming into it in a very weird spot where there was probably for maybe 2-3 months, I've been pretty in favor of banning Grief. Mm-hmm. I think that the gameplay with Grief is pretty miserable. I think all of the worst games in Modern involve that card. I also think when you have the Grief Scam combo, your win percentage is crazy high. I think it's between 70 and 75% in across the board. And then when you don't have it, you're still playing a really, really strong Modern deck, and I think that dynamic is problematic overall. And I was very in favor of banning Grief for a long time, and then I started to work on the Cascade Bean deck, and the Cascade Bean deck, more or less, I think that it is, going to, if you haven't seen it, it's kind of a weird looking list, but it is more or less a 4-color Omnath deck that is playing Shardless Agent and Bloodbraid Elf, where Shardless Agent is always cascading into Up the Beanstalk. And Bloodbraid Elf is usually cascading into a Beanstalk or Shardless Agent. You play a couple other cards too, like Teferi Time Raveler and in this or two.
Right.
And the idea is that Up the Beanstalk is a ridiculous card, and it's an even better card advantage engine than the One Ring, and it's a card that gets crazy in multiples. So being able to play 8 copies or 12 copies if you count the Bloodbraid Elves is a really ridiculous formula, because you just very quickly you get 3 copies into play, and then every time you evoke a Solitude or a Fury or cast a Leyline Binding, you're drawing 3 cards, and you're able to just remove all of your opponent's permanents,
right? Draw
most of your deck, and attack with Bloodbraid Elves and Shardless Agents until your opponent is dead.
Right.
I found this formula to be very, very strong. I think it's better than the existing 4-color Omnath decks with some small pros and cons, but I think overall it's a power level increase.
What does this have to do with Scam, though, Evert?
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Okay, I'll let you cook.
Yeah, so I kind of have a very simple, more out, focused view. The One Ring, in my mind, before Wilds of Eldraine, was a very borderline Modern card, a card that is close to ban worthy,
right?
Probably definitely a design mistake, and clearly the best card advantage engine in Modern.
Yeah.
After playing with Up the Beanstalk for 2 months now, or a month, or however long it's been since Wilds of Eldraine,
about 6 weeks.
It's about 6 weeks. I feel very confident. I think most people can even agree at this point that Up the Beanstalk is a degree better than the One Ring.
Yeah.
Which is a very interesting and weird dynamic.
Dang.
Is that we had the best card draw engine ever. Up the Beanstalk is a degree better. And I think, and so what's very interesting and weird is that the Beanstalk decks are very good against the Grief decks. And another interesting dynamic is that the Beanstalk decks are very much in flux and changing and evolving. There's a lot of people excited about the deck, a lot of people playing different versions. There's a really cool deck in the hands of a player named Tristan. I can't remember Tristan's full username, but top 8'd the mock showcase with the same kind of Cascade formula, but was playing Ardent Plea instead of Bloodbraid Elf, which pitches to Solitude and Force, and was able to play Force of Negation because you can't play that card with Bloodbraid Elf.
Right.
It was playing Time Warps. It was playing 70 cards.
Was that 4 Time Warps and 70 card deck, right? I think I saw them tweeting about it, something like that.
Yeah, I was playing a Time Warp build before the Bloodbraid build. I played that the day before, but mine was like 60 cards. I think Tristan's list was better. It was pretty interesting. And so my main thought is that like with like the Bean, it does, but despite Bean being so good and better than the One Ring, it also feels early to ban it. It's been legal in the format for like a month. It's kind of like similar to Orcish Bowmaster in the sense that like both cards are really, really good, but they're also very popular. Like the player base as a whole really likes the card Up the Beanstalk, I think. I think it's,
yeah, in
general, a popular card that might change after a little bit of time.
So it's like a gravity well pulling things in around it, swirling around it.
And so I think that in the long run that there's going to be like fair decks of Modern are going to be, it's going to be Scamming Grief versus the Up the Beanstalk. And I think that Modern would be in a much better place if you banned Grief and banned Up the Beanstalk. But I think it doesn't really make a lot of sense to ban Up the Beanstalk now, despite that that's my prediction for where the format's going to go. It doesn't make a lot of sense to ban it now. It is just, I think, too early and doesn't have like the metagame percentage and the tournament like results to ban the card yet. And I also think it doesn't make a lot of sense to ban Grief at the moment, because if you ban Grief, then like the Bean decks really do just take over.
Go completely wild.
Yeah.
What do you think? So, like, I was at the RCQ this weekend, a lot of, like, 61 players, a lot of people playing Scam, a lot of people talking about Scam, of course, there's so many mirrors, and just, of course, it's just the discourse of modern players right now, right, is not only just Scam, but bans overall. And a lot of the conversation that I was hearing or involved with was, like, if, saying stuff like you, right, which is, like, if you take something out of Scam, then you're going to have to take something out of the Omnath decks, probably going to have to take something out of the Cascade decks. Like I heard people talking about like Violent Outburst and things like that. And I'm wondering, I guess, two questions. This is the worst way to have an interview, right? Is two-part questions. One, like, what do you think about that general sentiment? And then two, where does that leave us? Like, where do you stop? Do you stop at like, okay, well, then we'll have creature combo decks where like Yawgmoth and maybe Heliod combo are ruling the roost? Or like, what, are we all playing like Merfolk out there? Like, do we ban stuff till Jund Saga is like the best deck? Like, what are we doing? Although people are saying like Ren and 6, which, Jund Saga plays, so.
Well, the reality is that, and I think nothing is like more true or proves this point better, is that the majority of like Magic players are kind of bored, and like they want things to shake up, and they want change, and they want the format to be exciting and interesting all the time. And I'm not really any different in the sense that like I love when things shape up and I love when things change. Like these BNR announcements, I think like most of the time, like I think Wizards wants there to just be no changes, and like they just, I don't really know what their point is, but I don't think Wizards wants it to be this big content day that BNR has like kind of turned into. But I understand it being this big content day. I think as far as like banning Grief, banning something from Omnath, it's all like a weird dynamic. I think a lot of this sentiment comes from like gameplay being like pretty poor, both with like Scam Grief and the Omnath decks. I think that's kind of the biggest issue. I think that the point of wanting to remove something from the Cascade decks doesn't make a lot of sense, because if you ban Grief, you are nerfing Living End also,
right?
Which I think is definitely of the Cascade decks the deck I'd probably prefer get taken down to peg, because also, like when I say Grief, all the worst games of Modern involve Grief, I do also mean Living End. Like the games where Living End, like Grief's your sideboard card, Force of Negation's your sideboard card, and then Living End's you. It's just like one of the worst things ever. And there's a really fine line, I think, with managing the ban list based on win percentage and also managing the ban list based on gameplay considerations. I think it's unrealistic to expect Wizards to just treat a format like this machine where it like the only reason you ever ban something is because it's so dominant and the win percentage is so high. And it's also unrealistic for you to expect Wizards to ban any deck that has poor play patterns, any deck that the general player base perceives to be unfun. I think it's just a very nuanced thing, and I also think Wizards has done a very good job curating the Modern ban list over the last like 4 or 5 years. I think they've done a better job than I would have just by myself. Like I think like the preordained unban was not on my radar at all, and I thought that ended up being like a fantastic ban at the time. I thought that the Luris and Yorion bans, I did not expect them to ban them those cards at the time they did, but they both ended up being like big net positives to the format. And I think they've taken a very careful, slow, curated calibrated approach to the format that's been slower than most people maybe would like or expect, but I think in general has been pretty good.
One of the things we talked about last week was we identified a lot of ways in which people appear to be attempting to target scam specifically, because it was all about scam. But I think there's decks that are attempting to sort of target the wider meta altogether and just sort of ways people are playing the format, whether that's going to be something like hardened scales or, you know, just another natural predator to a number of decks. Then we can see options for people attacking what's going on and creating natural metagame churn. But then like after this weekend, I'm at the RCQ and I see like probably a full 20% of the room on scam, and people seem to be, you know, not necessarily enjoying these mirror matches.
Yeah, I mean, one of our other friends of the show, who was also in Denver, by the way, the day after you RCQ'd, said he was at a tournament, that's Spencer, that was 40% scam.
No.
Yeah, he said 40%. That was his claim.
I mean, that seems like an exaggeration.
He said it was like 19 out of 41 people. Which
Holy
is
smokes.
like high. So, I mean, I don't know. Look, we were on the show last week, and Shane and I both said we don't think anything needs to be banned. But then the week went on, and it was kind of. I mean, I still kind of don't think it needs to be, but the week went on, and it's like the number that was 15% became 20%, became these anecdotal reports of like 40% over the course of like 10 days. Like, I guess my question is, there are other options out there that we think are decent against scam. Like, do we think this wave is going to crest? Like, what do you think? Like, now that there hasn't been a ban, do you think the wave is going to crest, or are we just going to ride it like this for a while and kind of this is what it is?
I don't know. Like, to some extent, you know, it's hard to predict like what is ever going to happen to the format. But the reality is, like, you can play a deck that has a favorable matchup against scam, but it is like truly an impossible deck to hate out from Modern in a way that I don't know that like I've made, like the last time like I felt like a deck was impossible to hate out from Modern was like Cascade Valky.
Right.
Like I played a PTQ at that tournament where my opponent turn one cast a Tybalt and was able to resolve it through a force of negation via their own commandeer on turn one because they had Simeon Spirit Guides.
Right.
And then I'm pretty sure like I force negation, they commandeered, I needled the Tybalt, and then they were able to like brazen bar with the needle plus the Tybalt and like just win the game anyways. It was like main deck needle was crazy. And scam is not as extreme as that deck. That was the best deck you've ever seen in Modern's history.
Right.
But there's just no amazing way to attack it. Again, you can play a deck that has a favorable matchup against it, but it's like, you know, you can resort to playing Leyline of Sanctity or Leyline of the Void, but both of those, like, you have to keep a really good 7-card Leyline hand. And
agreed. Yeah.
It really has to be like 7 cards too a lot of the time, because like if you keep a Leyline of the Void hand, you're just going to lose to Ragavans and Bowmasters and Fable if your draw isn't good. If you keep Leyline of Sanctity, you can lose to Scam Fury super easily, lose to the same other cards I just mentioned. You also have to these ley lines are like your desperation just to beat those scam draws, and so you can sideboard other stuff. But if you're not playing to beat the grief draw with those cards, the grief draw can beat anything you have in Modern, like just period.
Yeah,
right.
Including other grief draws. Like I played 3 mirrors out of 6 rounds, right? And the games were just as miserable as one would describe. Like I think I probably had I had one good game out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. Do you know what I mean? And the other ones were I scammed them on the play, and then the other ones were I'm mulling to 5 because my hand is just trash, and I'm just like, well, hope they don't have it, and they're keeping 7 or keeping 6, and then they get me, and that's just the kind of, and it happened for me and it happened for them, so it's like I'm not complaining about it. It's just kind of the reality of the situation. And I think kind of what you're saying, Evart, is like the overall matchup spread for scam is so strong, combined with the ceiling being incredibly high, and the fact that like the best way to beat it is just sort of hope you win the die roll or keep a better hand and then go from there.
Now, I'm not trying to call you out specifically, Shane, but like last week
Oh yeah,
You and I were much more
I'm
tempered.
seeing something different.
Yes. What do you think happened? You just played a lot more Scam while you were prepping for this RCQ, and then went there and experienced it more, or you saw the looks on your opponents' faces as you crushed their Titan dreams into dust, or what do you think?
Yeah, I played even more. Like I played I played a couple leagues. I had the 6 rounds of the RCQ, and I don't know. Part of it is just like I kind of said last week, is like this consolidation around certain decks in the format feels stronger than typical. And in my local meta, that's things like Amulet Titan, but we're seeing that as a pretty high percentage deck just on the online and other paper deck metas, and Scam specifically, and a surprising lack of the Omnath decks in my local meta. Like I've seen like 3 RCQs worth of data, and people just aren't necessarily playing it in paper just yet. I'm sure we'd see it more in other tournaments. But anyway, I guess what I'm getting at is like almost like what I think Stan was trying to get at last week. I don't necessarily agree with like his potential reason for this, which is like he thinks it's not a necessarily great deck, but I think it's like we almost need protection from ourselves. Like, can you stop us from just playing the best tournament deck by getting rid of it? Like this deck that has like really strong matchups overall and against most decks, and then if you want to beat it against itself, is you're going to play it. Excuse me. If you want to beat it, then you're going to play the same thing against it a lot of times, or maybe hardened scales if you think the meta is going to be 40% of the room.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like Scam is like kind of weak against 4-color Omnath. It's kind of weak against scales. It's kind of weak against coffers, but it's not. You're just like playing a normal game of Magic where you're slightly unfavored. And
right.
I don't know. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of Pioneer in the sense that like once you come to like an understanding of the format and an understanding of sequencing, when you're playing Scam, you're just not making that many like unique decisions. Like I think
aren't.
I think it takes time to like learn to be proficient with the deck and understand the sequencing. But like it reminds me of Pioneer. Like once you understand the important matchup dynamics, you're in a lot of ways capped in like how well you can play your games, and I think that Magic games are very interesting when they're different, when they're varied, where you're doing a lot of different things. And like I think that's a big problem with why people don't like the gameplay.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like I've played tournaments with Rhinos. I've played tournaments with Scam. Those are kind of the main decks that I've done a lot of playing with over the past year or so, right? And I think that with Rhino, I told Dave this on Discord yesterday, probably after my tournament, because my tournament was on Saturday. So I was like, I think that I made way more meaningful decisions in my Rhinos games than I made across all of these Scam games. And that seems weird to say because it's a mid-range deck, right? But like ultimately, a lot of the things like you said were either I only had so many decisions because I only had like effectively 2 cards in my hand, and the other ones were for scamming. And after I scammed my opponent, we're just they're in top deck mode. And I can't really make a lot of decisions based on that. Ultimately, of course, there's like the usual like what's on the board, blah 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 blah. But I think like the interaction that I had with my opponent being sort of all front loaded is a lot less interesting to me than the interaction throughout the game that I even have with a deck like Rhinos, for instance. And that's not necessarily meaning it's still not getting at a ban. Does it seem to get banned? Ultimately, I'm saying like, do we need protection from ourselves playing like this deck that is not necessarily particularly interesting, particularly compelling, but also just quite good?
Yeah. I don't know. I like playing Scam. I've said on the show a bunch of times. I've played it for a long time. It is so weird to me. Not weird to me. Like it's always felt like a powerful deck, but it's been a journey, right? To go from basically last spring to now, to have it suddenly be like, hey, this is so much better than, and yeah, I know it added Bowmasters and other stuff that we talked about last week, and the metagames changed and things like that. But like, it's wild that this is where we've ended up, is that whole thing has turned out to be so good that just, you can't stop people from doing it because it feels great, because it feels like you're in control the whole time, I guess. I don't know, but it's high roll, I guess. You're like, It's like people will take maybe an easy path or a deck that has a slight, like, I don't think it's that easy to play, but maybe that's on me. But it's people will take the high variance, high reward play if they can. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree that I don't think there's any deck in Modern that's easy to play.
Sure.
I think that to me, I mostly think that when you're playing Scam, it takes time to get proficient with it, and there are interesting decisions, but I feel like you get to a certain point where you just identify exactly what you're supposed to do in every matchup, and it's very clear what it is your roles are. Like, is this a turn 1 Fury matchup? Is this a matchup where I really need Voidwalker? Is it a matchup where I really need Bowmaster? Like, you just, I think, come to a pretty fast understanding, or fast is not the word, but eventually you come to an understanding of what your role is in every matchup, what hands are keepable, what hands aren't keepable, what your sequencing decisions are, and you're mostly just kind of going through the motions at that point. Is kind of what I meant to say. And it takes time to get there. Like there is skill involved in like learning that point, but I don't know. To me, it feels very much like Mono Green and Pioneer, where you just know exactly what kind of hands are keepable in matchups, like how you sequence all of your cards, and like you're just kind of like operating the machine, to me, if that makes sense, which is fine. Like a lot of Magic is like that, but
sure.
I think I think maybe even the majority of Magic is like that, but I think a lot of people kind of look to find something else when they're trying to play the game.
So the reality is that we have no changes, neither in Modern nor Pioneer. I think based on what we've been talking about Pioneer recently, looking at the pretty darn even deck performances that kind of move up and down slowly, I think that Pioneer is probably totally fine to not have a ban, but Modern people were expecting it. I think many of us were expecting something. We didn't get it. Where are we going? I think you kind of hinted at this earlier, Evart, which is like you expect the Beanstalk decks to become more popular as people iterate on them. As you know, what's funny, Evart, is you did the thing where it's like at my RCQ on Saturday, one guy was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm playing the Aspiringspike Cascade Beans deck." Like they just had it in paper that day. They were like, "This looks like I'm going to bring this," and like that's the kind of stuff I think that just continues to sort of build on itself, right? Is those kind of trends, especially if the results are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the bean deck is really interesting, and I need to kind of take a little bit of a step back to understand it some more. Like the initial results were like pretty crazy. It was like one of the better like two, like I can't remember what I think my record after like 2 days was like maybe 27-5 or something like that.
Yeah.
But it was also like, it's also been very weird where I could feel and see, and like having talking with people online, it's very clear that like the Modern metagame like immediately started to adjust, and there's like this arms race in the bean deck that was very interesting, where there's like a ton of different strategies to approach the mirror, and the mirror is really weird because if you don't have tech for it, you just like, your opponents will just be able to answer all of your threats, and you just can't, and you won't be able to kill them. Like, and if they just have a way to not deck themselves with like an endurance or something, you can't win. And then so like people are trying to win the bean arms race. And then you also have a lot of people, I think, like I got shielded by Scam a lot more than I had been lately. I think people are playing more shielders in the sideboard of Scam, and I feel like people started to play more like combo strategies. I heard that people were playing like a lot of Bird in the prelims to like combat the bean deck. People playing like Red Green Valakut. Like there was at one point I was like 20-5 with the bean deck, and 4 of my losses were to Red Green Valakut or something like that, which is like such a like weird anomaly. And so this is kind of what I mean. And like Modern's kind of, I feel like in some ways like in a frenzy here, where people are like playing with the beans, they're playing to like combat the beans, and they're also like, all the bean players are very concerned with not losing the bean arm race too, which is a very interesting dynamic. And I don't know where it's all going to settle. But I think it's going to be a part of the metagame going forward for sure.
Yeah. I mean, theoretically, we have another ban window 6 weeks from now.
Yeah, they can also just like on any freaking day say that something is banned. Like, and I think if the human beings in the R&D department ever come to the conclusion that something needs to be banned, they'll probably just come up and say this will be banned on a day. And I don't. The BNR announcement just feels like such a guideline, and that they never stick to anyways.
Right, they change it every year.
Yeah.
Like what they're doing with that schedule.
Yeah. It's not something to read so much into, I think.
So. All right. Well, Scam's not going anywhere. In the immediate future is what the general diagnosis is.
But neither is the One Ring, neither is Bowmasters, all those things that people think are potentially warping the format in some way, shape, or form in a way they don't really want.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because I will say, we don't usually talk about stuff like this, but the episode last week was, of course, we were talking about bands. It was the highest week we've ever had in downloads, right? Yeah. And we've been on a general uptrend with engagement on our channel, let's say overall. So I feel like as someone who gets like that kind of data as well over the last 2 or 3 months, like people have been very interested in Modern. Like we've had good reception, people have been tuning in, we've had good engagement in Discord and all the places like that. So like it's weird for me to at the same time have so many people who are annoyed by the state of the format, where at the same time people are really engaging heavily, and maybe they're engaging to express how annoyed they are, but also there's a lot of people brewing in our Discord and trying things out. And like, I don't want to necessarily end this segment on like a super negative note. That's just like, well, scam is still ruining everything, but like, I don't know.
I mean, again, I get back to like, who's our audience? I mean, who do we say this podcast is for? Who are we?
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, we're casual spikes. We're people who identify as people who like winning, like getting better, like thinking about their play. But ultimately, it's like, it's not our life's destination is not to like win the PT, right? And I think that in terms of engagement opportunities for people to play their weekly Modern event, you can play whatever the heck you want. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to play Scam. I think like a lot of the conversation is sort of driven from the top down, where it's like the weekend challenges where people are going to bring the best tournament deck, the RCQs where people are going to bring the best tournament deck because they just want the best chance to win, even if it's not their favorite deck, right? But I think like it's good to always keep that perspective, which is just like, hey, like if you want to like brew something cool, if you want to try to attack the meta with like your particular idea or concept or like tech package, like I think that's really still an opportunity, just not maybe not necessarily at the RCQ, or maybe not necessarily in the weekends challenge or something like that.
Yeah, and the reality is also like it is in a lot of ways good for people to be hot and cold on a format. And in an ideal world, you'd everybody love the format and it's all just perfect, but it's just not a very realistic point to get any Magic format to. It's very, very rare, I think, that you see that everybody's just having a good time and engaged. And that's usually after like a big shakeup that people are just kind of in a honeymoon period for a while. For the most part, your good formats, you have people where they're super hot and cold. There's things that you love and there's things that you hate. And that passion kind of drives you to play and explore and innovate. Like this year in 2023, I've played 205 different decks on stream.
Wow.
Last year I played 363.
But who's counting?
Moxfield is actually, I had no idea before, but I didn't, there's just too much, but like they sorted all my decks by year. And so I actually I just pulled up the
That's
number.
cool.
Yeah. And it's like, there's stuff you can be doing. Like there's a way for you to engage with Modern if you're passionate about Modern, if you're excited about the format, if you're interested. And it's fine to complain, it's fine to express it, but that is part of the experience.
It is.
I think, is being frustrated about cards. That is like so quintessential to Modern, is being upset about broken interactions.
I mean, I will say it's so quintessential to Magic. I mean, we've all played this game for a while. Like we can all remember different points in time and whatever formats we've all been engaged. Or you think just like this bomb rare that I hate playing against in draft or whatever. Like that is I guess part of it too. Yeah, Wingmate Rock. That card was busted. I guess I'm gonna keep scamming.
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of, I guess my question is not like, hey, what are you gonna keep playing, but more like, how are you feeling, Evart? Like, you play Modern more than most people on the planet.
I can't think of anyone who plays more Modern.
Oh, there's definitely people
some
though. Yeah,
okay.
I think like Brazilian grinders probably play more than me.
Okay, top 1% though, right?
Yeah, sure, probably.
Yeah, okay. We can agree on that.
Yeah, how are you feeling? Like, are you just kind of can't wait to go to work tomorrow, or you're just kind of
I always can't wait to go to work. Like I have lots of stuff that I think is like interesting, and like I'm like very interested in like mono black decks with either Phyrexian Crusader or like I think that the mono black like the mono black coffers and mono black without coffers, like I think both of these decks are very good. Underplayed in general, and like just got a lot better because Shieldred is like so tough to beat for the bean decks because you have to draw
Right.
off the bean. You don't have to draw off the ring. You have to draw off the bean.
And wins against Scam game 1 or game 2 or game 3.
Yeah, with the Nassif like Cling to Dust tech, like you're pretty reasonable against Scam, and there's a lot to be excited for. Like I think there's a lot of things in like Hardened Scales has become a deck that I had become like very invested in, and it was like my number 1 tournament deck for a while.
You got me to try it a couple weeks ago. Honestly,
Yeah.
we talked about it a couple weeks ago because of how well you had done with it in the last couple months.
Yeah, I think the deck's great. I think that like if you can figure out how, like I did like the matchup against 4-color Omnath with Scales before they printed Up the Beanstalk. I think Up the Beanstalk is like just so good against the Scales with how cheap it is and how it just like plays into their game plan really fast. But I'm thinking that you can maybe play like a Force of Vigor game plan post board against Omnath as Scales, and that like maybe can swing the matchup. And there's just always stuff to do. I've basically been playing Modern full time for 4 years. The only time I ever like got sick of it and switched to Pioneer for a while was really just because Pioneer was coming out for the first time. But this was this was like the Modern Horizons 1 Mox Opal Urza Mystic Sanctuary Oko Once Upon a Time deck. That deck was like that deck really made it kind of impossible to brew because like there wasn't any reason to play like a different fair deck in the format. And before the deck came out, it's kind of funny where Hogak was around, but Hogak wasn't played very often in the leagues on Magic Online, and everyone just had 4 ley lines in the sideboard, and you would beat Hogak like 35% of the time or something, even with your 4 ley lines, and the games are over really fast. But the Urza deck, the games were grindy and long, and there was just like no good cards against like the deck was just so powerful.
Yeah, I hated that deck too. The worst. The worst.
And I feel like my stream was able to succeed because of the ban announcement where they banned Faithless Looting, banned Hogak, unbanned Stoneforge Mystic. That was like maybe like the single biggest day for my stream, where like people like we just finally got to be invested in Modern again after that, and then it was just like a long journey after that. But I'm always excited. There's always something to be doing. Like even if shit is like not perfect, you kind of don't want it to be perfect because then there's nothing to do. You know what I mean? There's nothing to innovate on and try new stuff.
Yeah, and I guess stuff could always change with future sets. And if nothing else, people have said this a lot that when Modern Horizon 3 hits in 9 months from now or whatever that is, undoubtedly it'll tip everything over regardless of whatever the metagame is at that point in time. Something will happen. Who knows what?
I kind of have a weird prediction that Image 3 is going to be like less impactful than Image 1 and 2.
Oh.
I didn't consult on the set, so I don't actually know or have any insider info.
Well, what's weird is I did, so.
Oh, did you?
I wasn't gonna tell you guys. The NDA just lifted.
Okay. No. Well, it's weird because like when I did the Lord of the Rings stuff, they told me not to like talk about till spoilers and stuff are up. But like I know like Mason Clark has said he's consulted Image 3 and like they're a lot more lax with like the NDA stuff now.
Right.
And so it's like I don't know. I just kind of have a feeling that they understand the general angst around Image 2, and they understand. I think like Image 2 at the time it came out was like very necessary to be a hard reset on a modern format that was like the time between Image 1 or like War of the Spark and Image 2 was a really rough time. It was brutal. It was just like the worst era in Modern's history, in my opinion. And I think that post Image 2 has been the best era, but it's just been very different from how it's been in the past.
Yeah.
And I think that because it's now been so good, or at least I perceive it to be really good, I would hope that they don't mess with the formula so much that everything's out of date. And I really don't expect them to either. My confidence in play design and Wizards is like very high, and it has been for a long time. I think like from like Kaldheim onward, like there's been just so few design mistakes. There's been a few, but it's just like compared to the dense, like I can't remember another era in Magic's history where they weren't just like random broken stuff like every other set. It's been really good, I think. Yeah.
So speaking of random broken stuff, do you want to get out of here? We'll take a quick ad break. We won't subject you to that ad ever. We'll drop it in later.
We'll fix it in post.
Okay.
And then we'll come back and talk about how about Up the Beanstalk a little bit more deeply, which you've hinted at as being a new powerhouse in Modern. So why don't you all stay with us? David.
Shane.
My friend.
Yep. Let's talk about our beards.
Let's talk about some beards.
Let's beard out for a minute.
So we've established that you don't shave. I had a shave this morning, my usual Monday shave. I enjoyed it as always. I used my old friend Waves, which I will highly suggest picking up any and all Waves type products over at barristerandman.com. But you are less of an aquatic guy, and as we're in the autumnal months, what are you into lately from your Barrister and Man locker?
Well, I have a whole array of beard oils on my counter, as you know.
That's like me and the aftershave balm. I have like literally 4 of them in my medicine cabinet.
Yeah, I have been using the Maryland beard oil, and now there's not a huge amount of these left, but it's great. You said that the scent, I have not looked into what exactly the scents are on it. You said that it's sandalwood.
Okay, so I always love reading the descriptions. Notes of amber.
Okay.
Bergamot, which as we know is a funny orange.
It's a funny orange.
Cedar. Clary Sage. That sounds like a Magic the Gathering card.
Oh, yeah. Clary Sage. Tap 2 colorless and a green. Tap to give target creature +2/+2 until end of turn.
There you go. Perfect.
Sorcery speed only.
Coriander, fir, labdanum. Thank you. Leather. I need to ask Will what a Oponax is, because I read it last week and I still don't know what it is.
How's it spelled?
Oponax. Yeah, well, you look that up. I'm going to say what else is in here. Tonka, which is like a tonka bean type thing. Tobacco, sandalwood, vetiver, one of my favorites, and Lang Lang.
I got to tell you, I think that the scent I'm getting from Maryland the most
is Oponax.
What
is it?
Oponax is a wonderful name for a glorious gum resin ingredient that's smoky and soft, luminous and sensual all at once. Some people think it smells like crushed ivy leaves. I got to tell you,
I was going to say that crushed ivy leaves.
It's got this kind of I'm well acquainted. I used to live in a house that was covered with ivy. A lot of people don't know that, and but it does kind of have this resiny, like interesting scent that it's very unique, and it feels a little fun and interesting, as opposed to some of the stuff that feels to me a little more a conservative end of Will's stuff, like your sandalwood and stuff. I love those too, but this is like a special day one. Like Maryland's kind of like doing something special with my beard today.
Which is again why we like Barrister and Man stuff. You can get kind of the standards that are just going to be like your everyday. You can get the wild, off the wall, like cool, novel statement pieces as well. So Maryland, I see, is available in an eau de toilette. It's also available in the beard oil right now. There might be a few other odds and ends around. So we both think you should check that out over at barristerandman, MANN.com. If you use coupon code THEDIVEDOWN23, gets you 15% off of that first order. Like I said, holidays starting to come up. Get your big stock up all at once. Get all your stuff. Get 15% off, or feel free to wait to the big holiday restock. All the new products coming out in November that we talked about last week as well. So we appreciate all y'all keeping our relationship with Will going, and enjoy all the products over there. I'm going to introduce this section because I have the least to say overall. Thank goodness. I feel like every episode I'm talking more than everybody else, and then so I love having sections where I just get to listen and say, oh, that's fascinating. Oh, I agree. So, y'all, a few weeks ago, I'm sure Evart, you that's the one episode you've missed of the hundreds that we've done in the past few years.
Yeah, I've never missed an episode.
But we talked about. Part of the episode was talking about Up the Beanstalk. I personally played a few leagues of the Bring to Light version. That's a little bit more controlling, in my opinion. And I thought it felt, even for me who plays no decks like that, I thought it was like, this is good. I just don't know how to win with it enough, but this is clearly a thing. And since then, of course, like you said, people just keep iterating on this concept. How do we win the best with Beanstalk? How do we get the Beanstalks out on the battlefield? And that's what we're here to talk about, is kind of this newest idea.
Yeah, and Evart, as you said, you've been iterating on it. I'm looking at your Moxfield page right now, and there's 5 Beans decks at the top of here with great titles. Fury of the Beans, Burnt Beans, Shardless Bean Turns, Calibrated Beans, 4-color Bean Cascade.
How do you calibrate your beans, Dave?
Calibrate them with calipers. Yeah, of course, for calibration. So, Yeah, I mean, Evert, very, very into this card. We already talked a little bit earlier about what's going on with some of the principles here, but I guess the best way to start is, there's a lot of different things that we could talk about here, but I have such a hard time figuring out how to talk about decks like this because they're always such a pile of just extremely good cards. Just 4-color in general, it's like if you tell someone who's played a good amount of Modern, especially since MH2, hey, we're going to do a 4-color deck, they can probably tell you 80% of the cards that are in the deck without really having to see what the most recent list is, right? That's probably fair. So how, what's happening here that's kind of making this rise up to the top again, I guess, or what? I guess it's just Beanstalk is amazing, right?
Yeah,
like that's kind of it, right?
That really is something I want to hammer home, is that the One Ring was a card that brought the resurgence of 4-color back in a big way. It was a deck that was very good at capitalizing on the card advantage of that card. Up the Beanstalk is a better card draw spell, card advantage engine than the One Ring.
Hard to believe, but it is.
I know.
Yeah.
If you had told me that any random uncommon from Throner's Wild Cell Drain would be better, I just would have never believed you. But it's just so cheap, it's so fast, and they get so good at multiples. It just does basically everything you want to be doing.
Can I ask you a couple questions about this just to be clear? So when we talked about this card, spoiling this card, and we were like, hey, we think this card could be something. We were like, people were trying to play Karuga, right? And this card is clearly better than Karuga, right? But the thing is, it's 5 CMC is the trigger. So you have to really watch what you're casting. Of course, you have all your elementals to do that. But for me, the big thing that made me feel like this card was going to be good is that it draws a card when it comes into play, right?
Yeah. I agree. That's the thing with Up the Beanstalk is there's really no way besides Narset or killing you with Shieldred to trade favorably with it. You can spell snare it, you can spell pierce it, but it's a 2-mana spell, so it's very difficult to do that anyways. And if the Up the Beanstalk comes down and you play Haywire Might, activate it, exile Beanstalk, the Beanstalk player is up a very strong 2-for-1. You both spent 2 mana and they drew a card and you spent your removal spell. Against Prismatic Ending, it's a very strong 2-for-1. Against Leyline Binding, it's a very strong 2-for-1. And that's just the floor of the card. The floor of the card. It is just gonna sit and play. Very often draw you an extra card every single turn. Sometimes multiple cards every single turn. And I also do want to say, when I say that Beanstalk is better than the One Ring, the text on both cards, the text on One Ring is more powerful, but Beanstalk being 2 mana is just such a big deal.
What do you say to the annoying people like me, perhaps, that are like, yeah, but I can play the One Ring in anything if I so choose? Do you know what I mean? It's an artifact. It doesn't have to have 5 mana value or higher cards played to trigger it. I can, I can draw more cards, perhaps more efficiently without building my deck around it.
I don't think you'd be wrong. I think in that sense that is a big point in favor of the One Ring. There was a long time back when people would still like Jace the Mind Sculptor, where I would talk about how Karn the Great Creator was so good, and one big point for Karn the Great Creator was that why it was better than Jace was that it was colorless, and you could play it in decks like Tron and Titan. That was an advantage to the card. This is also an advantage to the One Ring. But this is just how powerful I perceive Up the Beanstalk to be. It is a card that, you're just mostly playing it in these blue-white X decks, but it is just simply that good, and that warping.
And a big part of this too is just the way that cost reduction effects have become a huger part of Modern. I kind of think, right? We have this whole group of cards at this point. It's headlined by the elementals, but then there's Leyline Binding as well. And then if you go through cards that kind of have the power for Modern, and you look at some of the lists that you have, I'm not sure which one of these is the one that you were playing with, trap cards and all of those kind of things. Maybe that's a bit of a meme, but there's all these cost reduction effects in Modern that take expensive spells that conditionally turn into cheap spells where you trigger the Beanstalk off of it, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of fun brewy stuff you can do. I play Soul Spike, and I've played Allosaurus Rider, and I've played a lot of different cards with Up the Beanstalk and had usually pretty good results. Well, one thing I really want to highlight about the card, and I think this can maybe help some people contextualize why Beanstalk is better than a ring and why it's so good. Think about an opening hand you can have in Modern. Are you ever happy to have 2 4-drops in your opening hand of a modern deck. With the exception of like Grief, like plus a black card, you're almost never happy to have 2 4-drops. You want to have like 3 lands, 3 interactive spells, and then like 1 4-drop that's going to draw you the cards.
Right.
When you have Up the Beanstalk in your deck, you are so happy to have any number of them in your opening hand. You're so happy to draw it every single time you draw it. You're so happy when it's in your opening hand. It is like the best possible card you could have in your opening hand in your bean decks. It is just always very, very good. But 4 mana spells in general, they just have these floors of they're clunky. You miss your land drop, you can't cast them. They're slow. And Bean just doesn't have those draws. I think that may be a good way to illustrate it.
Yeah. So let's talk specific. I guess you've done so much brewing with this lately. Like, I'd love to. I played the Cascade version, like the 4-color Cascade one. Do you want to start talking about that a little bit? Like, do you think that that's sort of the base level version of that deck right now, or do you think there's so much innovation going on that, we talked about the redundancy. Like, what you're trying to do is make sure you get Up the Beanstalk every time, and that's why you're playing Cascade spells. It's kind of similar to like Rhinos, the way Rhinos plays it in a sense. But is that the baseline for the deck, or do you think that's an offshoot, or like do you think it's just unknown right now?
I think it's a little bit unknown. I think like there's so many different ways you can build the formula. To some extent, like, you don't have to Cascade into Up the Beanstalk for it to be good. Obviously, it's like still just going to be a good card to play in a lot of different shells. Like even like the Monday of last week, this deck kind of like got swept under the rug. But I was playing the Calibrated Blast deck with Up the Beanstalk. I was like 11-4 on the stream with the deck. And it was like this deck was like particularly impressive and is also probably very good against the Cascade Bean deck because you just Calibrated Blast them to death. But it's. I think that specifically Shardless Agent into Up the Beanstalk and just having like your only 2 drops in your deck are like Fire, Ice, Leyline Binding, and Up the Beanstalk itself. Like this is still like, and then you have your Evoke spells on turns 1 through 2. You just have plenty of early game interaction, and like very simply, Shardless Agent is better than the One Ring would be in these 4-color decks, and you also like weirdly don't need to play Wrenn and 6 is something I'm starting to understand too, where you just cantrip so often with Up the Beanstalk. It's so hard for you to miss your land drops. It's like ridiculously hard for you to miss your land drops. And your curve is lower. You're not playing like as many 4-mana spells. And so like you don't need those, like you don't need to like Wrenn and 6 into like your Omnath as often anyways, which is so weird.
Yeah, I mean, Lorien Revealed actually, in a weird way, helps with the Wrenn and 6 problem as well. Like, I know that they're not really the same class of card at all, but that's something I found when I was playing this deck a lot, was I was so happy to just be like, sure, 1 land, 2 Lorien Revealed, and a bunch of stuff. Like, I don't care if I just have a single land here. I'm going to just press go, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if I'm cycling Lorien Revealed on turn 2, because I bring a Triome into play with a fetch land on turn 1 instead, I still felt like I was making up the time with it, because it just feels like the mana is really resilient. You get Up the Beanstalk, and there's so much connective tissue for a deck like this to work now. I think it just does.
I hate to interrupt you, but for the listeners at home who don't have time to, in their car, to go click on the deck list in the show notes, what are we talking about with this deck? Like in terms of its build, it's how many cards do we have? Is it like a 75 card deck? What are the threats? How are you trying to finish the game? All that kind of good stuff. What are we doing here?
Because that's what I'm trying to get to. I know I can take so long to get places with my thoughts. But yeah, so like more or less, I think that formula is good, where you have a Shardless Agent in your deck. The only 2-mana spell you can cast when you cast Shardless Agent is Up the Beanstalk. You have a very low curve. You have Up the Beanstalk. You have a Leyline Binding. You have Fire, Ice. You have Evoke Incarnations. You have a lot of good early interaction. I think the formula beyond that is very open. Right. You can do the Bloodbraid Elf to Fairy Time Raveler thing. That's what I've been doing and having a lot of success with. You can play the Tristan style Time Warp version. I had a Time Warp version. I think Tristan's build being 70 cards and playing Ardent Plea is better. I wasn't playing Ardent Plea in my build. You can just not play these other Cascade cards, have Shardless Agent be a card that's better than the One Ring, and just play like a bunch of Omnaths and play like a more traditional 4-color shell. You can play like the Calibrated Blast version. There very much is like an arms race here, and what's very tough about this arms race, and this is something I was like talking about on stream today and kind of coming to understand, is that the metagame is changing a lot. Both the bean decks are changing a lot, and the decks people are playing to counter the bean decks are changing a lot. And so it's difficult to understand what version is the best positioned in this ever-changing environment. So I think it'll take some time to settle down, but I do think that you're going to see Shardless Agent into Up the Beanstalk be like something that regularly happens in your modern tournaments. But beyond that, I can't tell you exactly like what's going to happen.
This makes sense. I mean, I'm all about Shardless Agent cascading into things. Let's do this, right? But I think one of the things that we talked about, I think when Dave was playing this deck, or when we were like at least talking about this deck sort of appearing, and when I played the Bring to Light deck, one of the things I appreciated was the fact that like not only is Bring to Light 5 mana, but what it casts can also be 5 mana to give you like a couple triggers. In this deck, it's like there's this what to me looks like a surprising lack of actual 5+ mana value spells to trigger the Beanstalk that you're building your deck around getting into play.
This is a similar thing that we talked about the first Up the Beanstalk list that we saw very, very like weeks ago. We were like, really? People are just going for 4 Up the Beanstalk all the way when there's only 12 cards that really trigger it. But I got to tell you, Evart, that's plenty, right?
Yeah, not only is it plenty, but like, so like when you get to like Up the Beanstalk is best with 5+ mana spells that don't actually cost 5 mana.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
So, but you also like when you have 5 mana in the deck, you have 4 Solitude, 4 Leyline, 4 Fury, and you also have like 2 or 3 Lorien revealed. So you do have like 11 cards in the deck that you can spend 5 mana on and like trigger as many beans as you have in play.
Right.
And you also, I played Elesh Norn recently too. Like you don't have to play Elesh Norn, but you don't need that many because like you have 4 Fury, 4 Solitude. Like you're usually gonna have a 5 mana play when you get to 5 mana.
It's also enough to cascade into like 3 of these, get the cards on the way up, and then cast like 1 Fury, kill stuff on their side of the board, and then you have this huge strike, like double striker that just drew you 3 cards when it came into play. Like that, it can be enough to just stabilize, get enough material again on its own.
Yeah, I'm remembering now the games where it's like I had a couple Beanstalks in play, and because the deck that I was playing didn't have as many sort of direct threats as like, you know, this deck with Fury and Elesh Norn and things like that. It's like I was like discarding cards. Do you know what I mean? It's just like I've got too many cards. I'm drawing through my deck too aggressively, and I'm not good enough to like handle this like amount of card advantage. So like maybe I'm sort of getting a little bit to win more by thinking like, don't you need to build your entire deck around drawing a zillion cards?
Yeah, that's kind of the fun thing about Up the Beanstalk is it mostly just keeps your hand full. It doesn't necessarily like draw you up to like 15 cards or anything. It can if you have with multiples in play, but it mostly just keeps your hand full and make sure you can just use your mana as effectively as possible every turn. That is one thing I really liked about the Bloodbraid Elf build though, is like you're just putting Shardless Agents and Bloodbraid Elves into play, and you're casually attacking with them while you're just focusing on drawing as many cards as possible for 0 and 1 mana and removing all their permanents. Like the Bloodbraid Elves just close the game pretty quickly while you get to enact your deck's game plan, which I found to be a very good formula, like at first last week. And it's just very cool how it feels like people are just like trying to go over the top of that and trying to like counter that deck's game plan. So the metagame is changing a lot in a very interesting way, and in a way I feel like I haven't seen in a long time too, which is, you know, has got me excited.
So high level, like let's talk about how a deck like this wins, because the problem I have with decks like these when I play them is I always end up with a grip of cards, and then I have so many options, and I'm like, it doesn't feel like I'm doing the removal right, you know, where I'm kind of like, oh, I didn't really get rid of the right cards on my opponent's side, or I don't know, like the sheer card advantage sometimes just feels like it doesn't get me there. So let's, within the Cascade deck to start, like you said, the game plan there for winning the game is like a little bit of chip damage with your Cascaders, but really eventually you're going to hard cast a Fury probably and attack in with it, or cast an Omnath and attack in with it once you're kind of way ahead, or like how does the end game usually play out for
that'll
you?
happen a lot of the time. Yeah. I think that people maybe underestimate how much damage Bloodbraid Elf does. You cast one Bloodbraid Elf, you don't hit from 3. You cast the second one, you attack for a total of 9, and then like it doesn't take much more than that to finish your opponent off. One kind of fun thing about the deck too is you have 4 fire ices in your deck, and you can kind of like, once the game gets towards the end game, you just get to count how many fire ices do I have left in my deck. And usually if you have enough fire ices in your deck to kill your opponent, you're just comfortable drawing as many cards as you want. One thing I found in the Cascade deck, and I've started to play against people online who are playing it a lot, is people will just put the 4th Up the Beanstalk into play aggressively, or in my experience with the build I've been playing, you are almost never supposed to put the 4th Up the Beanstalk into play.
4 is too powerful.
It will almost always like just put you in a spot like, the card Force Fruition, cast a spell, draw 7 cards. You almost always just deck yourself.
Wow.
Playing it depends on the game. Like if you're playing against like Yawgmoth or something where you can just actually kill everything, attack. It's not like that, but against a removal heavy deck, or like Scam, or the 4-color mirror, you're just gonna deck yourself and lose if you don't. If you're not like main decking an endurance or something, which you can, that's definitely an option. Yeah. And so that's one big mistake I've seen people miss. I do agree with you, Dave, that hard casting Fury is like something you're wanting to do to actually like get damage in. And But for the most part, I would, as long as you're not decking yourself, you're almost always going to win the late game because your late game is so good. Yeah. So I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah, and in the early game, as far as this particular deck goes, one question I had a lot was like, how much am I supposed to be just interacting? Like, should I go ahead and go and leyline bind? I mean, there's no rule for this, of course, but like, I felt like after I played that I didn't bias enough towards just trying to play Up the Beanstalk above everything else. Like, take damage, go ahead and let burn hit me twice or whatever. Just play Up the Beanstalk. Make sure that you get it online as fast as possible, whether that means getting, Shardless Aging into it on turn 3, or making sure you drop it on turn 2 instead of doing anything else. Like, is that a good rule of thumb for how you should sequence the early game too?
So one, if you're playing against Burn, you're probably having a bad time. That matchup is really tough.
Yeah.
I started playing 4 Leyline of Sanctity in the sideboard, and never played against Burn, obviously, as long as I had those in the sideboard.
I will tell you, I played this list with the 4 Leyline of Sanctity, and I leagued. I only got 1 win in the league, but I did win against Burn because of Leyline of Sanctity.
Okay, so that's good.
So I'm glad I put it in against the right matchup for what it's worth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think as far as your early game, it all kind of depends. Like, right. I think to some extent, like if you have it Up the Beanstalk in your hand and your opponent plays a turn 1 Ragavan, this is like maybe a good scenario. Right. You have Solitude, white card, Beanstalk, 2 lands. I think you should usually just Solitude the Ragavan. Like the Beanstalk is going to put you so far ahead of most Ragavan opponents. Like you want to avoid falling too behind on mana if they're Murktide, like falling behind like multiple counterspells, and if they're Scam, avoiding getting turn 2 Blood Moon.
Right.
I think it's always going to be very situational dependent. But one big piece of advice too I have for the Cascade deck is that the deck mulligans very well. Just any hand with a Beanstalk or a Shardless Agent is going to be a great hand, and you should like pretty seriously consider just mulliganing an opening 7 in a no matchup that's all removal spells and no beans.
Okay, I gotta ask. So like, what's your game plan if you're like, okay, I'm gonna really rely on this Beanstalk early, right? Like is the caveat like you also have some kind of interaction, whether that's like Fire Ice or a Solitude or a Fury, or like, what's actually kind of like bridging you between the Beanstalk play and your, quote unquote 5 mana, value cards, whether they cost 5 or not?
You don't need a bridge there because you're pitching to make it work.
I mean, in terms of the bridge, meaning like the cards you have, and like if you don't have them in your opener, are you just like hoping that you draw them? Because like you said, there might only be 12 or something like that, right?
Yeah, it depends on the matchup, right? So like if you don't know what the matchup is and your opening hand is like 4 lands, Fury, Leyline Binding, if it's just like random removal, I might mulligan because you don't have an Up the Beanstalk.
Yeah, right.
If you know the matchup and your interaction is going to line up well against your opponent most of the time, I would probably keep and hope to draw an Up the Beanstalk. It just kind of all depends.
Yeah. I'm being like, slightly pedantic here, but like what I really want to get out of you is kind of like, what are you really looking for here, right? Like, is it like, am I primarily looking to lean on the bean, or am I primarily just trying to play like a 4-color Omnath deck with all my elementals?
In the Cascade deck, you are entirely leaning on the bean. There's like There's just like that's like the whole deck. There's not really another plan. And what's interesting too is like because like you're playing Asian and Bloodbraid Elf, like these are like random beaters, and you're so good at keeping the board clear in the Omnath deck that like it's just kind of easy for you to play these like 3/2s and 2/2s, keep the board clear. Your opponent has no blockers, and you're attacking your opponent until they're dead on like turn like 6, right? Six or 7.
Right.
That is like the general game plan. That is the hope. And a lot of times your opponent is interacting with you, and you end up going very late, and you overpower them with the draw late. And then a lot of times you're playing against like, and if you're playing against like a spell based combo or big mana, you're going to be unfavored game 1, and you have a lot of like effective sideboard cards that you can try to draw into off your beans game 2. A lot of people wanted to like play like a lot of like 2 mana spells to cascade into off Charlotte's Agent post board, but the problem with that plan is it's not going to happen very consistently because you still need to keep your beans in, otherwise like you don't really have a good transformative sideboard plan, and you also only have 4 Charlotte's Agents too. So like you have Charlotte's Agent and Violent Outburst, like Bloodbraid Elf is not going to hit your 2-drop with any consistency at all. So I mostly like the plan of just like using your beans to draw into like Force of Vigors and Obsidian Charmals and Commandeer. Commandeer has been like very impressive. Finding the right number in the blue cards has been very tough, but that card has been crazy. I've had some like very fun moments with that. And so that's kind of, or to Fairy Time Raveler to lock down Cascade, or like finding Endurance against Living End. That's kind of like your general plan is like, game 1 removal. If removal's not good, like you're trying to draw into those interactive sideboard cards, and it's to some extent I don't think a super duper difficult to play deck to play once you get several reps in with it. I think there's maybe some stuff that's unintuitive, like you don't play the 4th bean almost ever in that build, but you cast the cards in your hand, you remove their stuff, and you win sometimes, you lose sometimes.
That's magic.
It is just like magic, yeah. So there's something you could talk about your plans and stuff, and sometimes like plans are like really helpful. Like one tip for any Hardened Scales players, I see this mistake a lot is people play their Hangerback Walkers against 4-color Omnath with no Zabaz and no Arcbound Ravager in play. But you have 4 Urza Sagas, you have 4 Zabaz, you have 4 Ravager. You need to wait until you can sack your Hangerback Walker to get tokens. You need to get the tokens off of it. You can't just let them exile the Hangerback Walker.
Right.
So that's a kind of tip that you can give. But like for a lot of decks, you draw your cards or you cast your cards, and you hope it lines up well against them.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about Cascade. Moving to some of the other decks, do you think so? A lot of them are trying to figure out like, what's a more powerful end game in a bean mirror, or what's a more powerful end game for different metagame conditions that are happening. But fundamentally, the engine is so close to the same. Like it's still got your Furies in there. You got Leyline Bindings, usually got Up the Beanstalk. Sure, it changes a little bit here and there. Like I noticed, the Calibrated Blast build doesn't have Solitude or whatever. Like there's stuff that changes as you do it. But is that kind of what's happening? Is it's like, okay, all these other decks are trying to figure out like what is the kill plan that's either more assertive or more spell-based or more something else to be able to just have a different flavor of using the engine?
Yes, I think that is definitely the case, and I think we're going to see a lot of evolution, and we're going to see a lot of change over these next few weeks, and I'm excited to see how the changes.
Yeah.
But
how
it's just kind of early to tell,
Yeah.
It's just not easy to predict what's going to happen, but I think that makes it fun. I think you can listen at home and have an idea, try to join the beans arm race, see how it goes for you, and yeah.
And now if we flip it the other way, playing against these decks, it's going to happen more and more often.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because I feel like the arms race. I think you've mentioned it, Everett, but I'm not sure you specifically mentioned like what that arms race looks like. Like what cards are people trying to use to go over the top?
Yeah, so in the Beans arm race of the mirrors, you're playing like Nexus of Fate or something I've been playing a lot of. Everybody else hates it. I'm starting to come around on like other plans being better. You're like endurancing yourself so you don't deck. You're playing Time Warps. Time Warp is like, I'm starting to think is likely better than Nexus because you just endurance it back into your deck and then you just keep, it's kind of like the same thing for less mana.
Yeah.
Alice Norn is like very, very big deal in the mirror. A lot of times it comes down to who has more Alice Norns. It's like these kind of like big go over the top cards, but these big over the top cards that are good in the mirrors are not good against like the rest of the field for the most part. And then against the Bean deck, I'm seeing a lot more Shieldred. Shieldred, Narset 2, more Narsets to stop the card draw out of like the blue control decks are like main decking Narsets. and black decks are either like main decking shielded or sideboarding shielded. I think one big problem is trying to fight the bean decks as Yawgmoth or as Scales. I think if you're Yawgmoth, I would try to recommend playing like of course you usually have your shielded on the side. You could try to play more shieldeds post board. That's not something Yawgmoth players have done. I think is something that would go a long way. Phyrexian Crusader is a card that is very, very powerful or maybe powerful is not the right word, but hard to kill. That can be a plan. That's what I'm playing tomorrow on stream is a Phyrexian Crusader deck.
That card is brutal.
Yeah,
like black-green infect, or you're just playing it in one of these other decks?
No, it's a Cauldron deck.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you Phyrexian Crusader is a zombie, which is kind of interesting. So there's a few. So you can turn your Phyrexian Crusader into a carrion feeder and sack a bunch of stuff to make it big.
Sure.
And also just like Cauldron Ballista will allow you to remove a counter and deal an infect damage too.
Sure.
And so it's kind of a weird list. Where I'm also playing Inkmoth Nexus, so you can like also Cauldron onto the Inkmoth Nexus and do a similar thing. And I'm playing like Priest of Fell Rites is something I've liked a lot. And there's like these mono black Cauldron shells. You sack your Bloodghast and your Grave Crawler and your Stitcher Supplier. You control the board. It's just it's a weird list, and I've played something similar before and like done well with it. I'm kind of like iterating on it now with the Crusaders, and has like a weird metagame call. But I will say that I think Force of Vigor is very good against the bean decks. Like with them having 4 beans, 4 bindings, they're gonna have a lot of enchantments in play. Back to Nature is a card that I think would be really good against them.
I was actually gonna mention that as kind of a joke, but actually Back to Nature
it
just destroys all enchantments.
Very seriously, Back to Nature is a card that like I would. Yeah. I don't know what deck that is not playing its own enchantments that would play it, but like Hardened Scale, like maybe Yawgmoth could play one, although typically you probably just play Force of Vigor instead. I caution you against cards like Beseiju, Haywire Might, like the disenchants that only kill one thing.
Yeah,
you need your disenchants to at least kill 2 things, or like the Force of Vigor kills 2 things for 0 mana. It's just like so nice.
Yep.
But you need something that's like about that power level.
You just can't try to 1-for-1. You already talked about this earlier, but if someone Haywire Mites the bean, you already drew a card, they spent all this mana. So yeah, I think that's a great tip to say, like, you do want to get the beans out of there, but you want to have a plan that invalidates multiples of them at a time, like whatever that is, whether it's Tranquility, which is what Back to Nature basically is, or if it's Narset. Do you think Narset's going to make a return as a result of it? Narset's been on the bench for a long time in Modern.
Yeah, if I was playing Blue-White Control, I would definitely be main decking like probably 2 Narsets. I don't know. It feels like a very tough time to play Blue-White Control, where I think you're like bad against 4 colors still, even with the main deck Narsets, and you're bad against Scam, and you're bad against Scales, and you're bad against Yawgmoth. But
so what's different here?
Yeah, exactly. That's never stopped blue-white players before. So I also think you'll see more Narsets in the 4-color decks. If any Murktide players are brave enough to register their deck in Modern, you may see like a Narset in the sideboard, like a single Narset in the sideboard.
Actually, what I was wondering about a little bit was blue-red or Murktide or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Murktide has just always been so mid, and like it's like in these kind of metagames where it's so poorly positioned. Because in a similar way to Scales, the card Up the Beanstalk is insane against Murktide. They have a very difficult time countering it. Like obviously, like sometimes you'll have like Spell Pierce on the play, but sometimes you'll be on the draw and you have a Spell Pierce and you have a Ragavan. Like, well, if I cast this Ragavan and they have Up the Beanstalk, I can't win. Like it is so hard for Murktide to beat a resolved Beanstalk. It is just brutal. I guess I don't have super strong opinions on Murktide beyond that, but I do think Narset is a card you could play to combat it. You could also just try to go over the top. I think Tron, I think Red Green Scapeshift, I think Coffers. These are decks that are like, things that you can go over the top of the 4-color deck and still beat them. Like to some extent, this is something a lot of people have been saying, and I agree. Like the Cascade build of the Bean deck is maybe the best build of 4-color, and it's a power level upgrade, but it doesn't really change the matchup spread of 4-color Omnath significantly. It's still kind of like very good against the creature decks and can be exploited by decks that don't play a lot of creatures and go over the top with big mana or combos.
Got it. All right. Well, I think maybe we should call it there for Beans, yeah?
Yeah.
Shane, any last thoughts?
No, I mean, I think it's good to have like an outline of how this deck is intending to work, right? And I think ultimately what I really like about it is like it just showcases like the continual churn of Modern, right? Where unlike even Pioneer, which has been pretty static for a decent amount of time, we'll talk about that during the NRG sort of dive down section as well. But that's been the same for a while, and every new set is doing something interesting, whether it's Lord of the Rings or the Wilds of Eldraine. And I just really hope that and assume that WotC knows stuff we don't, right? Whether it's in terms of their play testing, where they're like, hey, this next set has got some interesting stuff. I mean, we've got Agatha Soul Cauldron too, which is like still, I think, in the testing phase, and people are still doing interesting and novel things with it. And I can't wait to see where that card goes, honestly. So, I mean, just having you on ever to talk about the deck and talk about Modern, I think is a good reminder to me, us listeners, is just like what the format's really about, which is like when push comes to shove, it's still the people's format in the end, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of people like to think of it that way. I like to think of it that way too, and I think that it is. And I hope that it continues to be that.
Sweet. Well, let's take another quick break. Everett, we'll let you go after this. Before we take the break, people largely probably know where to find you, but where are you putting out content? How do you want to interact with folks on the internet and things like that?
Yeah, on twitch.tv/Aspiringspike, youtube.com/Aspiringspike, and then a little bit less on Twitter these days, but I'm still, posting a little bit on there if you're only on there. But I think you can find my best content, my most deep secrets and personal thoughts on stream or on the YouTube channel, which the YouTube channel is just my uploaded stream VODs if you can't catch live.
Sweet. Everett, great to have you back. We'll, if you want to get back on this pod more regularly, let's just keep talking to each other. We'll get you on those guest spots. It's always great to have you on, get your perspective, and I'm sure the people out there like hearing from you off stream when it can just be us asking you questions instead of like 1,500 people in your chat or something like that. So thanks again for your time, my friend, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
All right, here we are. After that lengthy discussion of what's going on in Modern right now, we're going to pop over to Pioneer for a little bit to talk about the Nerd Rage Gaming Championship Series Showdown in Indianapolis, the Motor City, this last weekend. Pioneer, 10K, 227 players. I think we definitely want to talk about Pioneer a little bit more as we ramp up to the end of this year with the RC coming up in Atlanta and all those kind of things. So, Shane?
Yeah.
What happened in Indianapolis?
All right, yeah. So this is the second to last event of this year. There's the Madison Showdown in November. Indy, I think the main event was this Pioneer 10K on Saturday. Sunday had a Modern Team Trios event. The data from that doesn't seem available anyway, and we don't have anything to go over there. So, like you said, Pioneer, we have a few reasons to be looking at it. One, we want to talk about what NRG is doing, of course, in the tournament series across the Midwest. So, the usual stuff. I think I want to start with the meta, because we continue to see a little bit of development here, a little bit of evolution, and here's everything over 3%. Okay, Dave? We've got Is It Phoenix at 13.7. We've got Rakdos Midrange just behind it, 13.2. Then third place, Mono Green Devotion with 9.3. And then we have a pretty big drop off. Maybe about half the pilots start dropping off. We go from 21 people on Mono Green Devotion to 11 on Raksack, 4.85. Then we have a bunch of stuff. Lotus Field combos at 4%. And then we have four decks tied at 3.52% of the meta. Humans, Heroic, Azorius Control, and Boros Convoke are all at 3.5. So that basically means that the below 3% is like 41% of the metagame, or I had the number here somewhere. I've lost it.
It's around the same number as Scam in some of the RCQs.
Exactly. So we have Phoenix back on top, kind of, what goes around comes around type thing. Is It Phoenix, I guess, sleight of hand was just enough to make this deck what it needed to be.
Yeah, I mean that's what Devin has told us, and if I'm thinking about decks that I want to play in Pioneer, with that being at the top, that's where I'm going to start when I start getting back into Pioneer again coming up here.
Yeah.
But yeah, sleight of hand just good enough to do what you need to do, be a better cantrip.
Yeah, but those top two decks were it and Rakdos mid were pretty mid this weekend. Like, Izzet Phoenix was 50.8 and Rack mid was 52% even. So, perfectly fine, win rates. We've seen popular decks do worse in some of these Pioneer events for sure. And even, our modern events, of course. Mono Green Devotion was the, perhaps unsurprising at this point. In terms of performance, it had a 41.5% win rate. And, you remember, it might be longer than we think about at this point, maybe like 9 months, where people were just clamoring, like, we have to do something about Mono Green Devotion. We have to get rid of some piece. We have to ban something out of it. It's just too prevalent. It's too powerful. I have to consider it too much. And I think we are at the point now where I think it's safe to say that Mono Green Devotion might not be the deck that anyone wants to take to a Pioneer tournament based on the data that we're seeing, unless you're an extremely confident pilot with it. But Racksack, on the opposite end of the spectrum, continues to do well. This is a 60.5% win rate for its 11 pilots across about 85 matches. Pretty darn good for sure. And then beyond that is a little bit more of what we've come to expect from Pioneer, which is really even matchups, or at least performances. We've got Lotus Field at like 51. We've got Mono White Humans at 51. We've got Azorius Control at 49. We've got Boros Convoke at like 52. The only outlier of our slightly less prevalent decks was Boros Heroic. Again, Boros Heroic doing quite well at 58.2%.
And doing a lot better than Boros Convoke,
yeah.
Which is kind of interesting because last time we talked about Pioneer, those two were kind of hand in hand as far as performance went.
Yeah, I think Convoke was slightly. I think Heroic was slightly better, but yeah, they were both doing pretty decently.
Yeah, but that's a pretty big difference for 7% difference or so there.
Oh yeah, for sure. Below 3%, I think a few standouts. Enigmatic Fires was 60.5%, and that was like 2.65% of the meta. And then a bad performance by Azorius Lotus Field, again, a 36% win rate for its like 4 or 5 pilots. So I think after like an initial flash, Azorius Lotus Field is not really proven to be a staying power in the meta, although we do see people keep bringing the deck to tournaments in smaller amounts for sure. I don't have a lot to say about this meta, Dave. This is the same meta that we have been seeing. I'm not deep in the weeds on Pioneer. I'm not playing it. I have no opinions about it. But like, I guess going back to what we were talking about with Evart is like, Pioneer does not change as quickly as Modern.
Surprisingly.
Yeah, exactly. You'd think it would be the other way.
Yeah. But guess what? Modern is just this weird size and shape that one little thing can come in and mess everything up, where with Pioneer it takes a little bit more kind of seismic things. And we've seen plenty of improvements in decks or cards that have ended up in decks from WoW, right? You talked about Sleight of Hand. We talked about like Bunnycorn at different points in time. Like there's cards that are making it into the format, but there's nothing that's really changing things quite yet.
I think part of it in my mind is just the axes of attacks and like the way that these decks want to get advantage are overly synergistic. And overly meaning compared to Modern, right? Where it's like, Izzet Phoenix needs particular types of spells and maybe some kind of magical creature that would fit into the archetype, right? Like Rakdos Midrange needs a very particular type of card. Like we saw the Misery's Shadow or whatever a few sets ago that sees occasional play. That's the kind of thing that would like slide into Rakdos Midrange. Or like Mono Green Devotion needs some kind of artifact card that would be better than the other 14 tutors that are in there and all that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Racksack is very synergistic. Lotus Field, very synergistic. All Mono White Humans needs a particular kind of creature card that's better than the ones it already has. And in Modern, a card like Beanstalk is pretty innocuous, right? And you can slot it into certain types of decks that are built around maximizing it, or not even maximizing it, like just using it in some kind of way. And it's not saying like I need to be in a combo deck or I need to be in a sacrifice deck. I just need to be in a deck that plays cards, and guess what? there's a lot of cards in Modern that you can quote unquote cast for 5 mana. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think that's just the kind of thing, or like a Cascade card, right? Where it's like, if it's 3 mana value or higher, and maybe does something that Cascade wants to do. And I think, I'm not trying to say that Modern has oodles of the types of things that can sort of slot into the decks that want it. But I think that there is potentially more opportunity for a generic-ish card to see play that won't see play in Pioneer.
Yeah, but we have talked enough about Modern.
Oh, yes. Let's go back. We got to go back to Pioneer. So
let's go back here to Pioneer. So, all right. So we talked about the overall meta.
Yeah.
Tell me about this top 8.
Yeah, I mean, it's another pretty good. I mean, good if you consider diversity good. Top 8, we've got Hunter Ovington. This is the Swiss finishes. Hunter Ovington on Gruul midrange. This is really similar to the Gruul deck we talked about the other week with Devin. Basically, it's Gruul, but it has that Saga card that makes a 3/3 beast. It can you can sacrifice a card and sacrifice a creature, get one of 3 mana value, etc., etc. Is it 3 mana value? Is there any creature in your deck? I forget. I don't know. We'll worry about that later.
I'm taking a look right now.
We'll fix it in post. Dave, look it up as I talk about Will Kovalchik on Greasefang. 2nd place. 3rd place, Jonathan Hobbs on Rakdos Mid. 4th place, Charles Eiler on Enigmatic Fires. Those are all pretty stock lists. What'd you find for me?
Huntsman's Redemption.
Yes, that's it.
Chapter 2. You may sacrifice a creature. If you do, search your library for a creature or basic land card, reveal it.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Put it into your hand, and then shuffle.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, good card.
Any creature.
And then the third chapter makes it gives 2 creatures +2 and trample.
3rd chapter, 2 creatures +2/+2 and trample.
I got it. All right, 5th place. Michael Burnett on Izzet Phoenix. This is an interesting build to me. And Dave, I'm curious if you have a take here. This one has 2 Demi-Lich. Haven't seen that card in a minute. And I think a full playset of Picklock Pranksters as well, which is the 1 in the blue, 1/3 flying with vigilance. Shane, that sounds bad. But wait, there's more. It has the instant adventure spell, Free the Fae, also 1 in the blue, which mills 4 cards, and then you put an instant, sorcery, or fairy card from among the milled cards into your hand.
Yeah. People have been liking this card.
It seems good.
You
put, maybe you get a Phoenix in there and you get an instant or sorcery of your choice back in your hand. Seems okay.
I mean, it's 2, draw a card. Yeah, exactly. Mill some stuff. It's like Thought Scour, but you get to pick what cards you draw.
Yeah, it makes me think of it's a good comparison. It makes me think of a dredge card. Do you know what I mean? Or it's just
right.
I'm putting stuff into my graveyard and I get something back into my hand, which is literally what you do with dredge.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I imagine you're not using the creature side unless you absolutely have to later.
Yeah, it's just a good spell.
Maybe it comes up. Yeah.
And then 6th place, Piper Powell. You've probably heard that name before on the Rona Luca combo decks that we mentioned just a couple weeks ago. This has the Rona combo that we've talked about in the past, but also that Luca Atraxa combo backup plan, something to do with your mana if you have a bunch of it. 7th place, Benjamin Ungar on Izzet Phoenix. This is more of a kind of stock traditional list, if you can, think of that. And then 8th place, Alexander Jones on Bant Ores, which is basically good old Boggles. It's got the second creature, the second Bogle is Saiba Cryptomancer. It's just the 1 blue 0/1 with flash, with hexproof and backup 1, which effectively makes it enter as a 1/2 if you target it instead of something else. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that this is not playing the green creature from Wilds of Eldraine that Devin had liked in Boggles.
Oh, yeah, good point.
I've been playing around with a little bit, and it's going back to something that kind of has hard hexproof instead of just ward.
Yeah.
Because remember, that's the difference there. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely a good mini Bogle for you, for sure.
Yep. And Jonathan Hobbs wins this on... boring old Rakdos midrange over Michael Bernat on Izzet Phoenix.
Good player, though. Jonathan Hobbs, well-known.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well-known player, for sure, so...
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of names that I saw looking through the list of players at the NRG, as usual.
Yeah.
Dave, I don't have a lot to say here about this tournament. I think Pioneer is sort of in a stagnant place, unfortunately. I mean, whether or not that's bad is in the eye of the beholder. right? Like,
Yeah.
From the outside looking in, we've had this discussion before where it's like people often are just like, I don't want the churn. Like, I don't want my decks to be devalued by bans or by dramatic changes to the format, and I can get really good with it and just be like my Lotus Field expert, or I can be, a Greasefang expert or something like that. But I think that many players are also just kind of like, give me something new, give me some reason to try something new. And I think, we talk to content creators. We are effectively content creators ourselves in terms of the way we engage with the game, especially Pioneer.
Ugh, my mother will be so disappointed.
So yeah, I mean, like, I think ultimately it's like you can't get a huge edge with your deck selection. There's just a really big variety of decks in the top 8. Like, I think the performances of these popular decks frequently is around 50%. There's a few outliers recently. That doesn't mean they'll stay outliers.
Yeah, but I think that it's nice to be able to have this other format that has a couple of decks that don't really exist in Modern right now with their game plans. I mean, if you look at like Boggles, like, that doesn't really exist in Modern at the moment.
Yeah,
if you look at Phoenix, obviously Phoenix doesn't exist in Modern at the moment. There's stuff going on in here that's interesting, and it's a good break from Modern. I know that people have frustrations with like the hollow play draw disparity in this particular format, and like that hasn't been solved yet. But I still think there's a lot of fun to be had here in Pioneer, and
I think you can play different decks than you can in Modern, and that's a good thing. I mean, just last week Stan was like, I just wanted to be playing like Is It Phoenix and Pioneer again. Like, I just wanted to try this out, see what's going on there, because it's like you said, it's like you just can't do that type of thing. Like, your spell slinging decks are like prowess, you know what I mean? And it's not really the same thing at all. So I'm there with you. Like, I think, like, I'm not saying that Pioneer is bad. I'm just saying, like, I do understand why some people might be down on it, but also I think it's a good opportunity to be like, look, I can perhaps be up on this. Like, if I just like to grind some decks and be good at things, like, and there's certain types of play styles, especially like, Battlefield style play styles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, go for it. I want to touch a little bit on Dave, and I want to pick your brain. Like, I think one topic I wanted to get in here is that Mono Green Devotion, I was kind of hinting at this earlier, is like a great example of like a deck of, I think that everyone was like, this has to be addressed. Like, you have to do this, WotC. Every ban and restricted, like, you got to do something. And now I think it's kind of reduced to like a tier 2 deck. It's like a sub 50% win rate. It's losing representation. Is this the kind of like reality that we have to accept of Modern as well? And I don't want to go back to Modern, but I do, which is just like, is this the type of thing that we need to keep in mind where it's like, let's have some perspective. Like, we have seen that churn can happen without adding another card to the ban list for the next 5-6 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think we got to hold on a little bit and see what happens.
Sure.
That's right. I mean, there's all kinds of unanticipated stuff that can happen. I mean, remember, like Prismatic Omen being added to the format made a huge difference Prismatic Ending.
Yes, I was going to ask.
Prismatic Omen. That's a different card. Prismatic Ending being added to Modern made a huge difference and like effectively made Heliod not work anymore when it was a bit of a menace in the format, like, or persisting around being a menace. Like, there's really subtle things that can happen to Magic in general. There's new sets every 2 months, like, it's something can happen, and something can happen to shake up Pioneer as well, or something really subtle can happen and make a deck that was the menace become something of an also ran again. So it's, the churn continues.
Yeah, I think it's just a reminder to me, at least, where it's just like, hey, we can be patient whether or not we necessarily want to be. Magic's been around for 30 years, right? Like, let's try to keep that in mind sometimes, where putting a card on the ban list is sometimes worse than the alternative. Let's get quickly into the leaderboard standings for those who are not already qualified by winning one of these showdowns. So there's 6 at-large finishers who make it to the end of the year championship. I'm not sure if this list was updated after the Modern event that finished on Sunday. I did check this today. It said it was updated on the 14th, which is Saturday, and that did include the winner of the Pioneer 10K. Although if the Modern was a team event, I don't think that, I guess they get points anyway. So here are the folks in the at-large spots. Benjamin Unger, They finished 7th place. They're now at 93 points. Will Kowalczyk also finished second here, was at 88 points. Chris Smith at 84. And then we have a pretty tight group of folks here with Fletcher Johnson at 70, Ryan Hayes at 69, and Cliff Boyardee at 67. So there's our current top 6 who would qualify if it ended today. But we have a good number of players who are within striking distance. They can grab one of these top 6 spots if they finish like in a top 4 or even a top 8 for some of them, and the other folks up there don't get any points. So we've got Sarah Shearing at 63, Theodore Jung at 58, Sean Gallagher at 52, Casey Ryback at 51, and Travis Williams at 50. I think based on my math, those are the ones who have a legitimate spot at trying to snag one of the lower seeds out of those top 6.
Yeah. Well, congrats to all the people who did well this weekend in Indianapolis, and we are excited to see what happens with the conclusion of the NRG Championship Series for 2023 before we go into the invitational from the last event coming up in Madison.
Oh, Dave, just before we end this episode, I'm sure everyone's wondering, Shane, how did you do at your RCQ? I ended up at 4-2, 14th place out of 61. Another totally adequate finish. You heard what I had to say about scam mirrors earlier. Here were my 6 matchups, by the way, okay? Scam, Titan, Scam, Titan, Scam, Burn. It was very exciting.
Yeah, there you go.
I got some good experience.
Nailed it.
So that wraps up this week's show. If you haven't yet, feel free to subscribe to our podcast. You get the latest episodes as soon as they come out on Thursday morning, usually. If you use Apple Podcasts, feel free to leave us a rating or review or get engaged with us on Spotify. We'll probably post another poll because last week's did so well. So keep a lookout for what we ask on the Spotify episode this week. If you want to reach out to us, feel free to give us a tweet at The Dive Down, all one word. Give us an email at thedivedown@gmail.com. If you want to support us, which we truly appreciate, you can join the Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown or get in our store, grab some merch at thedivedown.com/store. Heavy Play, of course, our most recent sponsor. You get some incredible deck and dice boxes, play mats using the EquipMag system, which I can vouch for being cool. I definitely had some people even stop me like kind of wide-eyed as I was attaching stuff together, snapping the deck box and dice box together. And I was like, go to this URL and use this code, my friend. And they were definitely perhaps thinking about it. We'll see if they did.
Perhaps.
You can use code TheDiveDown2023 for 10% off your first order at heavyplay.com. Mana Traders, of course, longtime affiliate. You can use code TheDiveDown23, all one word, for 10% off of your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards there. And of course, Barrister and Man, shaving soaps, body soaps, fragrances, and more. 15% off your first order using code TheDiveDown23. And Nerd Rage, you heard us talk about them for a little while. They give our listeners 8% off of their paper card order with code DIVE8. Thank you, Nowhere. Thank you, Spaceblood, for letting us use your music for so long. And until next week, get out there and plant some beans.